it's me again. It's Svea from the SAP Community team. And yeah, of course, I'm not alone here today. And I want to welcome first all our audience to our next live stream about one app, two flavors, comparing SAP UI5 with UI5 Web Components for React. So welcome also to my two speakers. And of course, I'm more than happy to have parts of my team members here with me. So we have Nicolai, Geburek and Michelle Moody. Both are developer advocates and we are in the same organization. So I'm more than happy to have you both here. Welcome to this live stream. And before you're going to start, let me phrase it easy for the audience. So I want to invite everyone to ask questions. You can do this already during the demo from Nico and Michelle, because it's more an interactive thing here. And yeah, we want to have you asking questions. So feel free to write it in the chat. And I will also provide you some links during the demo so that you can switch to community and have a look into the profiles of Michelle and Nico or to the topic page. Yeah, so that's all from my side. I'm looking forward to the content and I hand over to you, Nico.
Thanks a lot, Svea, for the warm welcome and welcome everyone watching. So this community call today is about one app, but with two flavors. So we thought it would be a cool idea to build the same exact app, but with two different frameworks. So I built an app with a freestyle UI5, SAP UI5, and Michelle built the same app, but with UI5 Web Components for React. And we thought it would be cool to kind of compare, you know, the development flow, how things were going, of course, what the end result looks like, and just overall how things went, maybe also challenges we encountered. And yeah, I will just go ahead and first of all, I think I will show you the app just so everyone's on board and you know what we're talking about. It's a very, let me just share this right here. Here we go. I hope you can all see my screen. So it's a very basic bookshop app. It's built on top of the popular CAP bookshop backend that I guess a lot of you know. So it's, you know, a very, very simple bookshop here. You can browse books, you can search for books, then you can, you know, select one, order as many pieces as you want. You cannot order more than the stock allows you, right? So you can only order 12 because the stock is 12. And if we hit order, we can see the order was successful, and we have obviously the CAP as persistence layer in the background, so we can see the stock for the book I just ordered is 0 because I ordered all of them, right? So that's the app, and you're currently watching or seeing here the UI5 one, because I built the UI5 one, Michelle built the one in React. So to kind of give all of this some structure, this is our agenda for today. So you are currently watching the intro. Next, we're going to talk about the development flow. And by the way, we won't have any slides here today, right? That's as close as we're going to get to a slide here. This is my terminal, all right? Next, we're going to talk, what's the next point? We're going to talk about how the framework supported us. And probably some challenges we had along the way, right? And then we're going to compare the end results, obviously. And we also have some time for Q&A. But as Svea said, whenever you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Svea will interrupt us, you know, when the question is connected to what we're showing on the screen at that moment. And we'll make sure to answer that question. All right, so that's how we are going to go about this. And let's get going with the development flow. So as I said, the whole project is built on top of the CAP backend, right? So I'm here in my project repo, and we have here the bookshop thing. And by the way, we'll share the link to the GitHub repo So you will definitely be able to check that out yourself as well. So in here, we have the bookshop, right? That's the whole thing. And we have the app, the database, and the service, right? That's the classic cloud application programming model structure. And I didn't really touch the database or service in any way. It's just a standard bookshop backend. I only really touched the app folder here. And in here, I personally started with the index HTML and bootstrapped UI5 sort of from scratch. You see here, right, in the script tag, the bootstrapping of the UI5 framework itself. Oh, and actually, I used OpenUI5. I told you before I used SAP UI5. So I used OpenUI5, just to be specific. And I started with the index HTML, and I didn't use any template this time because I wanted to get the raw experience, right? Really build it from scratch to also have like full control and to really know what I'm doing. And so I started with the index HTML. I added component support. You can see that here in, where is it? Oh yeah, this one, line 11 here. Component support, we have the component.js. Then I added the manifest as a descriptor file, just very basic UI5 structure. And then I added the view and the controller. We only have one view and one controller here. That is a little bit on purpose. Could have split the UI controls up into more pieces, but to really demonstrate the differences between React and UI5, we opted for just one view file because that's something that is pretty much, or that is a little different in React. Anyway, just one app for one controller. And after setting up the controller, it was really at that point a simple, okay, what kind of feature do I want? What UI control works for that? For example, I wanted a search field at the top, right? I wanted to have a search functionality. So I thought, okay, what do we need? We need a search field, right? And at that point, it's just going into the UI5 documentation. And actually, let me real quick pull this up. So I have it somewhere here. So at that point, it's really the dev flow is just, okay, what do I want? I want a search field. So I go into you can go into the samples. Actually, good example, go into the samples, search field, check it out. Okay, how does it look like? That's pretty much exactly what I want. Then you can check out the code up here, right? Then we have this kind of flipping over. We can check out the code, copy that over. And of course, we can also check out the API reference if we need some methods or events that we want to listen to, or something more specific. So we can go into the API reference, search for search field, which is kind of funny, and check out all the events, methods, things like that. Right. So that's what the development flow looked like for me. Right. I bootstrapped the empty project, put my controller and my view in place. And then it's, from that point on, it was just checking out the samples and the API reference, which worked in perfect harmony. So that's what I did. And I think I will now hand it over to Michelle so you can share a little bit of what your journey looked like for the dev flow.
All right, thank you, Nico. As I was introduced earlier, my name is Michelle Mowdy. I am a developer advocate with SAP. So when we got this idea, I knew that I needed to create a repo that looked, or an app that looked incredibly similar to Nico's. So when I started on this, I just got familiar with Nico's application and what did it need to look like, what did the current code structure look like, and how could I then move that over into a React application. So after doing all that, I essentially just set up a repository and got the backend and server set up the exact same way as it was in Nico's app, because I didn't want to really rewrite anything. I wanted to keep it as similar as I could so that we could do a really close compare and contrast to the two different styles. So let me go ahead and share my screen so that y'all can see my code. All right, so I kept the structure as close to the structure of Nico's as I could. So I have the app, database, and server folders the same way. And then from there, when I went to create my application, instead of creating from scratch, which is what Nico did, I used the Create React app templating package service that they provide, because that's the way that most people that I know of create React apps. So it was actually quite helpful, because in the Getting Started guide on the React app, or sorry, UI5 Web Components for React, they have a very specific template for these applications. So after running this, I didn't have to set up any of the connections between UI5 and the web components and all of that stuff. It was just automatically set up. And after running it, I had the app file here with the index, the CSS, all of that stuff, and this public folder with all of the bootstrapping. So the next step for me was just to start adding components in the code and setting things up how I wanted to set them up. Yeah, so after that, I looked at Nico's code and I started using I tried to find the components that were the exact same as the one he used, because he was creating a UI5 app, and the web components for React are a wrapper around the web components, which are UI5 components? Not really sure. They're controls. There we go. That's the word. They're essentially just controls that you can use as a library. I was able to get almost the exact same components everywhere, which was great. And we'll talk more about those later. So after setting that up, then it was just connecting the front end and the back end, which was a struggle for me because I'd never done that before. I've never actually created an application from scratch. I've always come in to applications with the front end and the back end already set up, and I just create features on top of it. After setting that up, then it was setting up translations and then some CSS and updating the README, and then I was done. But if you take a look at the application, you'll notice it looks almost exactly the same as Nico's, which I thought was fantastic. So you can search and everything works properly, and then you can click things and get the description, you can order, and you can get all that kind of stuff. So that was my whole development flow. Yeah, given that I was working so closely off of Nico's application, I was able to really see differences immediately. One of the things that I noticed was that with UI5, you can use OData. With the React applications, that's not really available, so I had to create API calls in order to get all of that stuff connected. I couldn't just, connect it to a field, and then it would, when the field would update, the backend would update and all that stuff. I had to manually create these calls between fetching the data and then updating it in the front end and then pushing that data into the backend. And Nico, do you want to talk about your side of that?
Yeah, definitely. So as you said, for UI5, we obviously have fantastic OData support. So in my case, it was just very simple to, well, let me just actually show you. We're here to show some code, right? So for me, it was pretty straightforward in my manifest, and I hope you can see my screen. In my manifest, I I defined a data source. I just named it CAP books because it's the CAP backend that I want to get some books. And I specified URI, and it was pretty simple because the backend and front end it's served on the same server on the CAP CDS server. So I just said, hey, on that URI on browse, we have that service and it's of type OData, right? And from that point on, I didn't really have to worry about any calls going back to the backend because, with OData and UI5, whatever you do in the front is like automatically reflected in the backend. So I didn't have to write any, AJAX calls, or, I could also do that, but I didn't have to. So I just, was able to consume the backend and push data back to the backend without really worrying about any calls whatsoever. I didn't have to fetch anything manually, right? So after setting it as a data source, I set my default model here. So the model that doesn't have any name is the default model, and some additional configuration. But at that point on, I could just consume it in my view, in my table in here. So the path is just books, right, without any model in front. So that was pretty straightforward from my side.
Yeah, I actually want to show some of my code so we can get kind of the direct compare and contrast there. Oops. Yeah, there. Okay, so with the API call stuff that I had to do, one thing that was important is Nico's app is all hosted on the same server, while my front end and back end are actually hosted on 2 different places. So when I run my application, I actually have to run the back end and the front end separately. So that was slightly more difficult than it was with the UI5 stuff. The other thing is that when I set my backend up, I had to go into the package.json and proxy the server that I was using for the backend in order for there to be this connection, so that when I called my backend, the front end would know to proxy it to this location if there was no other explicit stuff done. Sorry. So you can kind of see how my API calls are done here. So instead of being able to just do some real quick connection by, setting stuff up in the manifest and connecting, and then just providing the API path and everything working, I have to create an explicit function just for calling it with a fetch, which luckily is actually built into React and stuff. So I didn't have to add a separate package or framework just for handling it. Although I think if I would do this again, I would probably use Axios because it's a little bit less verbose and handles some stuff. So with here, I was able to fetch the data from the backend, get the response, and then return the response as a JSON. And then I could use it anywhere I needed to in my code. If I wanted to update the backend and stuff, it was the same thing, just post and adding a body, and then making sure everything went okay and all that stuff, which I think is automatically set up in UI5, correct?
Yeah, so for me, as far as posting the data back, so like submitting an order goes, the CAP backend actually provided an action. So I was able, again, using OData, and I will just kick you out of your screen share here real quick.
That's fine.
I was able to do an action binding. Let me just find that piece here. Yeah, so I was able to do an action binding. You can see that here. So I'm binding the submit order action, and that's part of the OData service that the CAP backend provides. I was able to bind that to a flex box, which is like the box around the book's description and title. Let me just show you. So the flex box around this whole thing here. So around the order button and the descriptions and all those things. So that whole box is bound to an OData action. And then when I click the button here, then the onSubmit order, I think is what the method is called. Yeah, so the button here is bound to the onSubmit order thing. And when I check that out, the onSubmit order gets the binding context, and then that's actually like pretty similar. I still have to set a parameter for that action, which is similar to setting a body for the preparing the body, for posting it somewhere. So the action and then setting the parameter is pretty similar. And then eventually I don't, execute a fetch, but I execute the action. And then, I get the data from the backend and things like that. So the actual submitting the order thing is pretty similar, but of course I have that advantage that I can leverage the OData backend service and bind that with an action binding, bind it to the whole control instead of manually having to write a post request. So that was a difference. Generally, I think, or while I was, while Michelle was just showing her code with the proxying and the hosting things on 2 different servers, I just wanted to say that I definitely could have done that with this project here as well. I just opted for using the CAP server because UI5 assets can be served statically as well, right? Like we don't need to, bundle everything up or anything like that. Although if we want to use it in production, we should do that. But just for this, for demo purposes here, I thought it would just be okay to serve it on the same server. And ideally, I would have wanted to use the UI5 tooling like UI5 serve, and then I would have to do something very similar. Instead of having the proxy, I would use a middleware. I think UI5 middleware live, no, CF destination is the one I would use. And then have like an XSAP JSON and like reroute all the requests to my backend. So like a very, very similar fashion as what Michelle did. Just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That shows my familiarity with building things from scratch.
No, that's all good.
Yeah.
That's all good. I mean, I didn't do it, so there's no, like, you couldn't have known. So yeah. Generally, I just wanted to say that I use the models here very much. So as I said, I defined the bookshop or the browse service and the books coming from there as my default model, or actually the whole browse endpoint is my default model, and then I get the books entity of that. And generally models and passing things around in UI5 is very different from React, because I don't think that in React there's such thing as a default model, like just putting something in a model, and then every consumer of that model will like automatically get notified or get an update if the model changes. That's like one of the superpowers of UI5. But in React, you will always need something manual, or you will need some sort of state management. But because in UI5, you can even use that for states. Just put a JSON model there and say, hey, this button is bound to that model. And whenever it's set to true, you enable it. When it's not set to false, you disable it. So that kind of thing, even state management works in UI5. But for React, you would have to do some manual work, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did notice when looking at your application is,
Yeah, I just wanted to show myself, because there is a question, but of course I didn't want to interrupt you in your answer. So maybe you go ahead with your answer, and then I can give the question here.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that I noticed about your application was that updating your UI was actually quite simple. You bound it, and then whenever this data updated, your UI updated. It was essentially just one line. With React, it was quite a bit more complicated, to put it lightly. So this is my bookshop, which you had exactly one file for all of your front end, while I have 5, because or 4 actually. I have 2 duplicates here, and I'll talk about those later. But I did that because in React, we like to compartmentalize and split stuff up. So when I was looking at your code, I noticed that when your data updated, it updated the front end, and it was one line of code, and you didn't have to do much else. For me, I had to, like, for the book list in the tables. So this part right here, when this pulls the data from the back end, I and I want it to show on the front end, I have to use this use effect to fetch the data, set the data to this book list value in the state. And then all the way in my component down here, I have to then put in the data. And because I also have this search here, I had to manually filter that book list and send in that book list instead of the OG book list and show that. So that's why there's another book list here. But I found it really interesting. The way that UI5 handles it kind of reminds me of, I think it was Knockout.js, a more vanilla JS framework for data binding, two-way data binding, which I used way back in the start of my career. So yeah, that was, oh God, I hope I answered that. Yeah, that was my experience with the whole data binding and UI updating and stuff. It was a lot more verbose with React. I will say though that if you use something like Redux, which is a state management tool, this is a lot easier to do. This kind of updating of the data all over your application. So yes. Svea, question?
Yeah, I dive in here. So of course, it's a great session already. We have good feedback. But Thorsten would like to know what database I use for on both sides. So I assume, but I don't want to say anything because I'm completely out of that topic.
What's your assumption? That would be interesting.
React and SAP UI5, okay. Or do I blame myself here now?
No, that's all good. So I think the question was regarding the backend. So what was like the persistence layer? So where's the actual information about how many books do we have? Where are the titles? Like the backend information that the user doesn't see. They just see like a representation of that. And the backends that we use is a SQLite in that case, because we run it on a CAP server, and the CAP server uses SQLite for local development. And if we were to build all of that and push it to SAP BTP Cloud Foundry, for example, we would most likely use HANA Cloud. But for running it locally, SQLite is the lightest, most lightweight and easiest option. So that's what we use with both versions, actually, because we consume the same backend. Okay,
cool. Thorsten, I hope this answers your question. And there's another one. Again, big thanks for the great session from this questioner here as well, from Oscar. What are your backgrounds in front-end development? Which frameworks have you both worked with so far?
That's a good question. We probably should have introed with that, but that's okay. So I am primarily a front-end developer. I have had some back-end experience, but pretty early in my career, I switched over to pretty solely front-end. I've done some Angular in the past, but most of my career has been spent in React. The last 2 years before I joined the developer advocates team, I was on a production team where we were developing an app on React using SAP technologies. So that's most of my experience. I didn't actually know anything about UI5 until March of this year when I joined this team. So if any of my information is incorrect, it's because I learned it within the last 2 months. Has it been 2 months? I don't know. Time has no meaning. Anyway, yeah. Really cool. Nico?
Yeah, so actually I'm also like not that experienced in other frameworks. Like I worked with UI5 for 6 months now, but prior to that I worked with React just a little bit, just for one project. I worked with Astro for one project. Probably not a lot of you know that, but it's like a wrapper around React and things like that, with some other additional features like hydration and server-side rendering, things like that. But yeah, mainly UI5 for the previous or for the past 6 months. Yeah, and I've done some backend things too, like for CAP or with CAP and just BTP, Cloud Foundry deployment things in general. That's sort of the background, but I haven't been long in this role too, so still learning, but I guess that never changes.
That's true. That's true. Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So getting back to the topic, I think one thing that I saw, and you quickly touched on that, Michelle, as well, was the whole idea of splitting things up into a lot of different files. And I mean, I said at the beginning that I purposely chose to only have one view and one controller to kind of over exaggerate what you do in UI5. I mean, I could put things into fragments and have multiple views, but I just figured, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just one view. Like if you look at it like philosophically, it's just one view, one page. So why not just have one view, one file, and then one controller connected to that. But I know that it is very different in UI5, and Michelle, you wanted to touch on that as well, right?
Oh yeah. In React, one of the best practices, it's okay, is to split the front end up into really tiny parts, really compartmentalized parts. And actually, while talking about this, I just realized that I could have put some things together to take some of the data out of the page, the first housing page that has all of the components, and I could have put them into a separate component and had all that stuff there, but that's besides the point. The idea here is that if you have a button that does something, you want all of your logic and data with that button to be in one file, so that when you put that onto your page, or into your, essentially the page where it's used in that code file, it wouldn't have all of this extra stuff that's not really relevant to it. So I'll kind of try and give a little demo about that here. So let's take this order button, for example. I have split this order and this, actually I'm not really sure what that's called, this component right here up into a separate component to compartmentalize it, and I called it order book. So this is my order book section. In the bookshop, you can see it here. I have my order book, which gets sent in a whole bunch of stuff like the selected book, the selected quantity, all that kind of stuff, and some state management things like setting the select data, which would go away if there was Redux in there. But if you look at this component, you can see that I have the translation for it, and if we were using something like Redux, which was state management, so that the data didn't live in the bookshop application and I wasn't fetching it here, or storing all of my state in this file, all of the data for the order book stuff, or all of the logic for the order book, would be in this file. Mostly I split this out because it's my habit to do so, and also to make this section of the code, which is the page and all of the elements in here, a little bit more readable. Because this is one component. Let me just put these both up here permanently. Versus having this flex box in here. Now, a lot of these elements are quite big like this and quite verbose. So if those were housed in this code right here, it would be very, very long. And these files, and I've seen them before, even with just something as simple as an analytical table component, which I have used, and I can demo that in a little bit, they can get to be several hundreds of lines long. And when you go in and maintain those kinds of blocks of code, it can be really hard to understand what's going on. So that's one of the ways that React kind of tackled that issue. And yeah, yes. So I think that's it on that topic.
Yeah. And the difference in UI5 is that you basically split up the descriptive code from the logic, right? You have a view and a controllers, and you split them up into two different files. But then at the end of the day, you still have less files, but longer files, I guess, because we don't tend to split the, the controls or views or fragments or whatever you choose to, call them. We don't split them up that much and just have them, in one larger file, I guess. And
that's
Svea is
it.
coming off camera, which is a sign for a question, I think.
Yeah.
Really, really cool. You got it. You didn't have to raise my finger. That's really cool. Yeah, Gregor is asking a question. Is there a noticeable performance difference between the two apps, for example, Lighthouse Score?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. We haven't checked on that, but it's a good point. I think we should add that in the respective repos. We'll definitely make sure to do that and add it to the respective repos. I know that for UI5, we can optimize it pretty well. So we have, and I'm pretty confident I have the async things in there in the bootstrapping. So it should score fairly well in a Lighthouse test. I'm not sure about React though, but we should definitely put that in the repos as part of the READMEs. Fantastic question.
Yes, absolutely. I have no idea about the performance of this. It's also quite small, so I'm not sure if the differences are going to be super noticeable with how small it really is and how little it's doing. But that's a really interesting question. I'm actually very curious about the answer here. I do know that if React does have performance problems, there are a lot of applications and frameworks and wrappers like Astro or there's another one, but I can't remember the name of it, that will help with all of those performance issues that you might be seeing. So.
Yeah, the question was from Gregor, so I wouldn't have expected anything else. He's always asking really good questions and is contributing a lot. So thanks for that, Gregor. And I see the three of us definitely in the next call because we have another one saying that it's such a great session. So we have to keep this in mind. But not only this, there's another question next to it. Which are the primary driving factors to choose between UI5 or web components and guidelines will you like to share with us? Did you get that?
I'm already off mute. So I would say it's highly dependent on what backend you're working with. If you're starting from scratch and you can do whatever you want, you could go either way. I guess that's personal preference then. But if you are working on an existing backend and have some SAP system, for example, that you want to communicate with, then there's really no way around OData, and you should go for UI5, in my opinion. But if you are consuming some other service, like some other API, it could be anything, but you still want it to look and feel like SAP and like Fiori, and you like React and or you want to learn it, whatever reason you want to, whatever reason there is, then the UI5 Web Components in general, and of course also the React flavor of it, is a perfect choice as well. So it's really depending on what kind of backend you're looking at, and yeah, anything that's OData and pretty much everything we have at SAP is OData. I would go for UI5.
Yeah,
slightly biased.
I'm biased in the other direction. Yeah, so my previous position was at SAP Eureka. And we were building an entirely new application, a new solution to a problem. And we did use React. We used a lot of the SAP backend, but we used React because a lot of the developers that they were hiring for this team had experience in React. And so SAP UI5 is very, very handy and very useful, but a lot of the developers nowadays aren't quite learning UI5, but they do know React. So if you're creating a new application and hiring a lot of people and they already have this experience in React, it might be a good idea to go for that, while also keeping the same look and feel of a UI5 app with these web component libraries.
Pretty cool. I will go away again the background in silence. So if there's a next question, you will see my video. Go ahead with your content.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I will just go back to the agenda real quick, because we kind of, oh no, that's the wrong window. Sorry. Here we go. We kind of drifted away. So we were actually talking about the development flow, but then we touched, on a lot of things that we actually wanted to cover in the next chapter. So, I guess it's just one big chapter now, but it was still interesting. So let's kind of go back to, at least try to go back to the agenda. How the framework supported us, and I have certainly a few notes that I wanted to share. So first of all, and I've talked about it a lot, is OData and data binding. It's such a simple but powerful concept. I don't have to pass around things at all. Like, I just put a model in place and everything will just work behind the scenes automatically. And I don't have to pass around variables at all. Also with the data, I just put a model there and can consume it from anywhere within the view. And that is so simple, but also powerful. And for example, when creating a list, I just say, hey, all of my list items should be, the items I have in this array, like in this little piece of data here. And then, all the things are done behind the scenes. So I don't have to loop through data or anything like that. And that's just, very, very handy. So that's definitely one way how the framework supported me.
I have to admit, I was quite jealous of how easy it was on your end, and it made me really want to put a state management system in my application to make my part easier, but I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, so I just went with the built-in React state. I was actually curious about how you built the search function for the stuff, because for me, I had to enact a solution where I had the base list with all of the books, and then I had a filtered list, which I had shown before, so that when, and I'll demo this real quick. So let's say I go here and I want to search for Wuthering Heights. I had to go through that base list, filter it, send in a new list to the table, and there it was. But I couldn't just overwrite the initial list, because if I wanted to go back, I had to have the original list, or I would have to make another API call. So for me, I have the initial use effect that grabs the data, puts it into the book list constant and the filtered book list. And then when I want to filter the books, I have to use the search string to filter the book list and then set the filtered book list. So I have two separate lists of pretty much almost the exact same content, but one is the reference and one is the one that I'm using in my actual components, which you can see here. As I mentioned before, this is using the filtered book list instead of the book list itself. So how was that solution implemented in UI5?
I'll show you. So, this is all I have for the search functionality. And I didn't really have to think about that code because I just copied that over from the documentation, really. So that's really all I needed to make the search work. I'm just using the filter and filter operator from the UI5 library, those two modules, and use some basic methods there. I get obviously from the query, which is like the what the user types. I get the new value, and I push that value to the filter. Then the filter operator does its thing, and then I update the list, and that's really all I do. And I don't have to worry about actually changing any data or having like two versions of the same data. Because imagine not having 5 books, but having 10,000 books.
Yeah.
Like juggling 2 versions of those apps, of those lists, would become pretty messy. So
if anyone has a solution to that. please put it in the chat. I would love to see it because
Yeah.
I did not like that solution.
Yeah. And, as I said, I'm going back to OData, but, if we had 10,000 books, we would have the batch requests, right? We would, get 1,000 at a time. So, performance wise, that's perfect. So things like that, that's just, I guess that just shows the maturity of UI5 and also of SAP and working with huge amounts of data. All those backends that we have require that skill. So yeah, the search functionality, implementing the search functionality was a little different for me.
Seems a lot easier. Yeah, than two separate lists, arrays in state and being held and filtering through. Yeah.
Right. We have also the internationalization, right, on our list here that we wanted to cover, and how the framework supported us. And I think actually that is pretty similar, done pretty similarly in freestyle UI5 and also UI5 Web Components for React, right? So for me in the freestyle UI5 app, where do I have it? I have it here. So I register a resource, which is a model, an I18N model, which is of type resource model. And then I point to my I18N files. And is it files or is it just one? Oh, it's two. I have German and English in here. So I just register that model, point to that resource, and from that point on, I can just consume that model in my table. For example, I guess I have it somewhere here. Yeah, for example, the label of the column is not just book, not hard-coded book, but it's the IHN model referencing the key book, and then it grabs the value depending on the user's preference language-wise. So that's what I did in UI5. And I think in your app, Michelle, you were actually able to reuse my files, right? So it was done pretty similarly.
I was, yes, and I will share my screen so y'all can see. Yeah, so I was actually able to use his files here. So we've got the German one, and I had to append this EN on there, but that was the only change that I made to his properties files. For setting up the translations, I have this array of supported locales, and then for each of my files in these supported locales, I went and fetched the files and registered them as I18N translations, essentially. I'm not really sure about the correct terminology there, but yeah. This was built into UI5 Web Components, and you can see it here that this is coming from UI5, the Web Component stuff. I didn't have to add anything, which when I started looking at translations, I thought I was going to have to add some kind of React translation framework to handle this, but luckily it's already built in, which was fantastic. I didn't have to do anything or really set anything up. From there, all I had to do was, let's see, one of my tables. And if you hear the cat, I'm so sorry. So here I just had to use the I18N bundle from my app. This is also coming from the UI5 stuff. And then I18N, get text, and then book. So very similar to how it's done in UI5. Yeah, the only other thing that I struggled with was the default language was English. And when I registered my stuff and got the file correct and all that, and I started seeing the German translations, I would go back and I wouldn't be seeing the English translations. So I had to go into, trying to remember the file, hold up, the index.html and add this property to this object here to say fetch default language equals true. So then I would start getting my actual English translations, which I thought was a little interesting.
Interesting that you will have to tell the framework to use the default. Like, isn't that the point of a default? But anyway, cool.
Yeah.
So next up on our list here, we have a list of notes here, things that we want to cover. We have documentation, and I quickly showed the UI5 documentation already at the beginning. I'll just share real quick, because for UI5, we always have where we have multiple things like actually you can see here documentation, API reference, samples, demo apps, and so on. But for me, the ones that I use mostly is definitely the API reference for detailed things. Like if I actually want to see, okay, what does the search field, what are the methods that I can execute, or what are the events that are being fired? For example, I figured that it would be cool to use the live change event instead of the change event, because I always like it when I search, just like Googling, like you search, and while you're searching, you get suggestions already. Oh no, actually, that's a different thing. Anyway, you get the results like while typing things, and you don't have to hit enter. You can still hit enter, but you get the results while entering the search term, right? So that's something I found in the API reference, right? And whenever I need some kind of inspiration, or hey, what are the controls that might work for this, or how does this look, done in a view, I go to the samples, and we have, an overview of things here. And I know, for example, maybe I know, hey, I need some sort of input. What else? What do we have? And then I can see, okay, we have a step input somewhere. And I know that's the one that Michelle didn't know the name of.
Yes, that's the one, the step input. Thank you.
The step input, right? You find it here, and then you can check out the code, by flipping this thing here, and then go back to the API reference, copy code over. So that's how the documentation supported me very well.
Yeah, and I can talk about the web components for React documentation. I'm going to take over your sharing. All right, so this is the file that I showed before where it's got the UI5, the template stuff. But here I think it's really nice. So this is pretty common for React web component libraries that I've seen. But so let's take a look at the step input. One thing I want to say, and I want to transition into this right after I talk about the documentation, is the components themselves are incredibly similar to the UI5 components, to the point where I was able to find almost every single component as a web component for React, which I thought was fantastic. So I thought I was maybe going to have to create this myself, but when I looked, there was a step input and it was fantastic. So here, instead of having to switch to another page to see the code, you can just do this show code stuff, and you'll be able to see and copy that code. And you can like play with it and all kinds of stuff. Another thing that I really appreciate is like you can set things in here. So I can set the max number of stuff to be 3. And if I do so, it updates this example right here, which is great. The other thing here is that you have the list of properties or props that are available on this component that you can go and change. So like with your search, I had to use an input because unfortunately they didn't have a search field. So but I was able to create one myself, as it had all of the properties that I needed, like an icon and a search and all that stuff. And we had on here, there was an on change and an on input. So on change would be essentially on blur when you press enter or focus out of it. That's when the event would trigger. Or on input, which is every single keystroke, which was your live change component or function, which I thought was really neat. Svea has turned on her camera, so I'm assuming there is a question.
It is, yeah, and you might want to stop sharing. So I have shared the GitHub links in the chat while you were talking, the links you provided me earlier, and there was a question if this is already live, the GitHub link for React, and so I understand you have requested this, and we hope to have it live very soon. Correct?
Yes, it should be live today. The person that is in charge of setting it to live is in my time zone, so it's a little bit early for him. So he should be able to do that soon.
Okay,
yes.
That was the question from Leo. And of course, also he's really thankful for this great session. Then he has another one. Are you planning the same bookshop app also as Angular? UI5 Web Component version. I hope I
Yeah, Angular and Vue.
And would it be similar to the React version?
That was not in the plan, but it's definitely something we can do. I actually wrote a blog post earlier this month that went live, and it talked about the different ways that web components, the UI5 web components, can be used in Angular, Vue, React, and Svelte. And in those, I was able to link a example repo that it was a to-do app, so not this bookshop app, that showed the same application written in all 4 of those different frameworks using web components. So there is examples out there that show the difference between all 4 of those frameworks, just not one that's also, or at least I didn't search for this, so I don't know if it exists, but one that also shows the UI5 version of it.
Really cool. Yeah, and I have added, of course, your profile links. So if you follow or you click the link to the community profiles from Michelle and Nico, you can find the content in the community, of course. So we only have 4 minutes left. So to the audience, write your question now, and to you both, wrap up.
Yeah, we actually had some more things we wanted to talk about, but I figured that went pretty well, so we might do a second version of this call sometime.
I told you.
We will save some content for that, and actually just jump to the sort of conclusion that we have prepared. So, I mean, you saw that the end result of the 2 apps was incredibly similar, and probably an end user who's not who doesn't have the skilled eye won't notice any difference, and it wouldn't make much difference to the end user. So it really comes down to the developer's preference, and also, as I said, the back end that you already have in place, and sort of the kind of app that you want to build. But you can always achieve very, very similar results with both frameworks, and you can build fantastic apps with both of them. And that's really the message that we wanted to convey today. And I hope that worked well. And Michelle, you have any closing words?
Yeah, just if you're using one flavor of the of UI5, let's say you're using UI5 and you want to upgrade to React, you can actually do so using these web components with very minimal impact to your end user. So you could spend the time to rewrite your application in React, and then you could go live and your end users might not even notice that there's a difference, which I think is really neat. And you could do it the other way as well. You can write a React application and then switch it to a UI5 application, and your users won't know a difference. And I just think that's something really neat and powerful about these web components and all that stuff, is that you can write the code however you want and everything looks the same, or almost exactly the same, which is just fantastic. It makes it so powerful, and it means that your team, whatever your team's strengths are, you can really lean into it instead of trying to learn something entirely new just because you want to use this certain look and feel for your application. So
yeah, and by the way, maybe it's also a good thing to know that behind the scenes, UI5, like freestyle UI5, all the UI5 controls that and the UI5 web components will be more streamlined in the future, because you can, at least for Open UI5, you can already use UI5 web components in your freestyle UI5 apps. That was recently enabled. So the 2 frameworks are moving closer together, which I think is great. And actually, I think this change will also come to SAP UI5 soon. And all new controls, I mean, we have over 900 controls in UI5, but all new controls will be implemented as web components first, and then via a wrapper made available to freestyle UI5. So I'm just saying those 2 frameworks will move closer together in the future, which I think is great.
Cool, and that's I think these are really cool closing words as well. And I would like to add here that this month is the spotlight topic in SAP Community, SAP UI5. So there we provide a lot of different blog posts and other resources for you. So it's definitely worth having a look into this. And when you scroll up the chat a little bit, you will find the links. I have provided them already. All right. We are really good in timing. It's 6 in my time here in Germany. So thanks so much, Michelle and Nico, for having been part of this. And I'm looking forward to the second part. I think it's really, there is really a great interest. Also, thanks so much to the audience for asking your questions. Have a very nice day, evening, whatever ahead, wherever you are based. And I hope to see you soon in one of the next streams. So thanks, everyone, and bye for now.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much for watching and attending. Bye.